Hello, my fellow humans, and welcome. What's one area in your lifetime, talent, or finances where you feel you could use a little more guidance or structure? Today's guest is Scott Maeder, founder of Inspired Stewardship and certified leadership and financial coach. With over 14 years of experience helping people master their time, talents, and treasures, Scott empowers others to live out their true calling. He's an MBA, a John Maxwell team coach, and passionate about turning everyday challenges into opportunities for growth and impact. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It is great to have you here today. Woo! I'm still thinking about that story you just told me about your last podcast, actually. So I was kind of like, ooh, God threw me off there.
It wasn't my last one. It was a couple of years ago, but
Just a couple
yeah.
of years ago. Okay. A truck we right into a house. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, we were talking about funny things that happen during interviews, and my funny, air quotes around the word funny. It wasn't funny at the time.
No.
Luckily nobody was hurt, so it was. But during an
Yeah.
interview, I had somebody had a diesel truck drive into their neighbor's house, and needless to say, we rescheduled the interview. But everybody was okay. Nobody was hurt. Only the house, only the
I
truck.
worked right through it. The truck in the middle of my house. Let's keep going. Excuse me, officer. We're gonna keep going. Give me 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was that's my craziest story. I've had a few other ones, but that's the craziest one.
That's the craziest one I've heard so far. I'm just looking around for a truck to come into my house.
No, don't even ask for it. It might happen. Don't speak it into existence.
That is true. I have to watch what I say. So for our audience, for those who are not familiar with you and your work, we'd love you to tell us a little bit about your journey that you've been on and how you came across John Maxwell's coaching as well.
Sure. So yeah, John Maxwell is part of a long journey of trying to find different things to train to develop in, and I'll tell you when that kind of crept in later. But I started the journey. I was going to go into medical research. I went to school in science, did medical research for a very short time, figured out, hey, you know what? Research work is actually about spending a lot of time chasing grant money and not a lot of time actually doing the work. Didn't really want to do that the rest of my life. So I pivoted. I became a school teacher, and everybody's kind of like, okay, that's quite a pivot. But my family, my dad was a teacher for a while and then a small business owner. My mother was a teacher. That education kind of ran in the family. So it was really more obvious than it sounds to go into teaching. Did education for 16 years, taught middle school, taught high school, did all sorts of science fairs and all of these things. I basically taught every science that they offer in the state of Texas, with the exception of the earth science. I don't do rocks. I can do all the rest of the stuff. The state says I could teach the rock stuff, but I'm like, I'm not teaching the rock stuff. It's not going to happen. I'm just not good at it and don't enjoy it. But all the other stuff, physics and chemistry and all of that, loved teaching, loved interacting with the kids. I was always one of those kind of Socratic teachers that tended to ask a lot of questions and work into a lot of activities. Of course, science lends itself to that. So that came very well with both the content that I was teaching as well as my style. And that's where I kind of began learning how to ask good questions and how to engage with people and how to motivate somebody that maybe wasn't the most motivated to be there, and all of those little things that come along with teaching. People, I always think it's funny. Teaching actually prepares you for a lot of stuff if you do it. If you're good at it, at least. I mean, there are bad teachers out there.
It prepared you to pay attention.
It prepares you for all sorts of things. If you're a student, it prepares you to not get beat, right?
Yeah, that
But anyway, get through all of that, and I eventually left teaching, went into the corporate world, did that for 11 years, worked myself up into a senior leadership position, kind of climbed the corporate ladder, was running a team of about 180 people, had 20 leaders reporting to me, and then people reporting to them, had a team 150, 180, depending on the time of the year and that kind of thing. And flying all over the country, doing a lot of corporate work, meeting with a lot of clients, engaging with the leaders within the company. And again, that's where John Maxwell came in, because as I was doing this, I began to realize that the skills I had as a teacher, and now working with leaders and working with a team and motivating people in the corporate environment, that a lot of the skills that come along with good coaching and good leadership and how to teach people, how to engage in people, how to motivate people, how to help people figure out their own goals, their own priorities, their own values, and then actually live those out. All of those skills I was developing were all kind of in common from the teaching. That was what I loved about teaching. Now in corporate, that's what I loved about corporate. And so my wife and I went through our own kind of financial journey where we realized that we were pretty deeply in debt. That actually started while we were teaching. I was suicidal because of finances. My wife and I nearly got divorced because of finances, all of the stuff that comes with that. And we basically decided, hey, we're going to do something different. We changed the way we were living. We started paying off the debt. We started completely living in a very weird way, weird enough that people noticed and would come over to us and be like, y'all are weird. Could you help us be weird too? And so we started helping other couples and engaging with people and doing coaching and classes and this thing. We started at first as a ministry, but over time we realized, hey, wait a minute, this is actually, you know, this is a business. This is something that we could do, and people need the help. And it's a way of engaging with folks and solving a problem. So I started the coaching business on the side, Inspired Stewardship, back in 2011, and then began to develop that. John Maxwell came into that as part of my coach training. I've also worked with a group called Coach Connections. I continue to work with them. I'm actually their head instructor, helping other people become financial coaches. And we do all of that kind of work. And then, of course, I work with clients. I've worked with clients in 20 countries, 38 states, over 1,000 clients at this point all over the world, helping them master their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can do what God put them on this earth to do.
Hell yeah, brother. It's a lot to unpack. That's truly phenomenal. It's quite a journey, so especially when you're talking about going from a teacher to a coach to coaching leaders in other companies,
Mm-hmm.
because people forget that we're all teachers,
Yep.
and especially coming from that background, that kind of puts you in the best position to help other people learn. You already
Absolutely.
have that. You're already set up for that success. It's amazing because I went into what I'm doing. People are always like, "Oh, you're teaching and showing people stuff." But I don't have a teaching background. I'd love to know more about teaching and how to help people get to places. And like you did John Maxwell's coaching program, which I've looked into, and I've
Mm-hmm.
actually thought about doing that. It might be down the road for me a little bit,
Yeah,
but
it's
just
it's a good program. There are a lot of great people involved in it. It's got a lot of good material that can help you with growth and development. Of course, I've always been a fan of John Maxwell himself,
yeah.
and a reader of his. I mean, right in the middle is one of his books right behind me.
Oh, there he
He's
is.
they're basically I've been he was a virtual mentor of mine, and then he became a real world mentor of mine because I've actually gotten to meet him and talk to him
Hell
and
yeah.
engage with him as well. So it definitely someone I admire and admire his teachings.
He's brought you along very far now from where you were and trying to figure out your financial road to success.
Well, a lot of the
Yeah.
financial came from, my wife and I just figured out that we needed to do different. I think a lot of Americans approach things, and this is actually not just in America. Again, I work with people all over the world, and turns out that we all have the same problems is, it's not really that you don't have enough money. It's not really that you don't have enough time. That's what it feels like.
Yeah,
But
it does.
often it's really about how you approach your priorities, how you approach your behavior, how you approach your mindset. I jokingly tell people I say I coach time, talent, and treasures, but I really only coach talent because at the end of the day, the way you handle your time and the way you handle your money is actually about how you handle yourself. It's not really
Ooh,
about time and money. It's about us. And that's both the good news and the bad news. The bad news is you're the problem. The good news is you're also the solution.
I feel that really hard because I actually was in that mindset of understanding how to adjust and how to live my life properly without having to have more money, more things. I'm still kind of learning that journey myself. And I'm sure others
Delayed
out there.
gratification, all of
Yeah,
those things, knowing what's important, where do you, because here's the thing,
there's
you
so
you
many
always
things.
make choices. And I don't care, by the way, I don't care how much you make, you still have choices and there's still limits.
I've heard people have money and they have miserable and they don't have to spend it, you
That
know?
can happen. This is the thing. Money is a magnifying glass, so it kind of takes what's already there and just makes it bigger.
Heard
So
that.
if you're a giving, kind, loving person and you get money, you're now giving, kind, and loving with more zeros behind it.
Heard
Where
that.
if you're greedy, you're selfish, you're that. Now you're that with more zeros behind it. So I've worked with some people that made very high incomes, had very high net worths. I've worked with folks that were at or below the poverty line, at both extremes. And what's funny is it's not obviously if you make $100,000 a year, the choices you have and the things that you can do is different than if you make $30,000 a year.
So
But there's
true.
always a set of limits. There's always a choice. There's always somewhere where you go, huh, is that more important or is this more important? Because it's called opportunity cost. In economics, they call it opportunity cost. The basic idea is if you do one thing with a resource, you can't then use that same resource to do something different. In other words, if I spend this hour with you on a podcast, well, I can't also be using that hour to do something else, right? It's the same thing with money. If I spend the money on a couch, I can't also spend that exact same dollar on a vacation.
But
I
people
would
try.
well, but then, and that's what they're doing then is they're spending future income because all debt is spending future income. Think about it.
Yes.
I'm saying I'm going to give you dollars in the future for you to give me some money today. That's what debt is. It's future income. So either way, you're still tying up income. You're still tying up money. You're still making an opportunity decision about where do you want to spend that money. And honestly, going into debt, it's not that I have a problem with debt or I think debt is evil, but realize the choice you're making there is you're promising future things. So you're tying up even later choices. It's not just about what you're saying yes or no to right now. It actually affects what you say yes or no to down the road. So it has future impact as well.
What do you think would be the cause of the way people think around money in terms of not understanding future money and tying, like you were talking about? What do you think? Why do we have this mindset around money like that? Like, I know we're not taught in school how to manage our finances, how to do taxes. We're just taught to go there, sit there, shut up, and then go home for the most part.
So a lot of it has to do with a couple of kind of biases that our mind has just naturally by the fact that we're human. One is we have a bias towards the immediate, that meaning something that's happening now automatically feels more impactful and important than something that's going to maybe happen in the future or even has happened in the past. Okay. It's the immediacy of things. So feeling that moment of what happens now is the most important. And by the way, to
So
some
intense.
extent, that's true. I mean, that's not like completely wrong. It's not
It's
like
an intense
it's not
feeling.
true. There's a truth to that because the only time that you can actually act is the present, right? You can't actually act in
Yeah.
the past or act in the future. You can only act in the present.
I mean, I've tried. It doesn't work very well.
It doesn't work. So it's that idea of that immediacy becomes a large bias towards, I'll deal with the future in the future. This is why procrastination happens. This is why, we promise our future self is going to exercise and eat better. Right now, I'm going to have that slice of cake.
That's
It's,
too
it's,
real, man.
all of
Too
those things.
real.
That's the immediacy bias. And then the other factor that I think happens is we look at money as a math problem. We think about it in terms of math. When in reality, yes, there's a math side. There's 1+1 is 2. That's a true fact. Compound interest either works for you or works against you because that's the way math works. So it's not that there isn't a math side. It's just the math side isn't all of it because there's also the emotion around money. There's the communication around money. There's the relationship that we have with money. A lot of times that comes from stuff that we haven't even thought about. We don't even reflect on. We saw how mom and dad handled money, and now we've got habits around money. We never were the ones that thought about whether those were good habits or bad habits. We just learned them.
This is normal. What do you mean?
And you don't
Completely
reflect
normal.
on it. And then if you're married, you add to it that your spouse has their own set of patterns and behaviors and habits and thoughts. And then you go out into the world and your friend has a different set and somebody else has a different set. So you have all of these different inputs that come into us, and we never really stop and think about them and evaluate them and think, wait, which of these are good habits and which of these are bad habits? What should I actually be doing? We don't evaluate it. We don't spend that time on ourselves and that time on introspection and all of that stuff. By the way, again, I'm talking about money, talking about time. Doesn't matter. This is why we don't eat healthy.
Like
This
you're
is why we don't
talking to me right
exercise.
now.
This is why all of those things come back to the same kind of root cause of if you never think about it, you're not intentional about it.
True.
You don't do anything because the inertia and the habit and the patterns of behavior without examining them and working hard to change them continue.
Ooh, I like how you said that. So let me see if I got this right. We learned habits from our parents or our friends growing up, brought those into our adult lives, took those as being normal, but
Mhm.
never really understood that we needed to create our own habits, our new habits around the money to actually be more successful with how we handle the money.
And sometimes it's
How?
even
What?
just keeping some of the old habits, but it's knowing which ones to keep and which ones to throw
I
away.
don't know which ones. There's so many.
If you don't think about it, you don't ever do it. Again, there's messages from marketing. Turn on TV. It'll tell you if you don't buy this product, you're not successful. It's like, really? Why?
And you buy that product, you have no money.
and
But
you're
you're
not
thinking
successful.
about money, but you're not thinking about how you're using the money incorrectly. That's kind of the mindset right there, I feel.
Yeah.
That
You
we
can
think about
trap
money all
into
the
it if you never
time.
think about it.
Yeah, we think about money all the time, but we're not really thinking about how we can actually value it more.
We think about it, and again, we come back to thinking about it kind of as a math problem, just as
Yeah.
a math thing, when the reality is it's a lot of other things too, because money isn't really the thing that we value. People will think, oh, if I make this much money, that, makes me successful.
It's,
Money's
yeah.
not really what you value. You're
No.
valuing other things like freedom or flexibility or the ability to make decisions or taking care of your family or being able to provide for your kids, or these are the things you actually value. Money's just a tool to help us get it. And so we almost kind of misplace our focus on the money instead of what we're actually after, our actual whys, the actual emotions
Mm.
and things that are driving us.
I love you said that because I just learned recently that money gives you options.
Absolutely.
No, and I was like, "What's that? What do you mean it gives me options?" I had a conversation with my sister a couple of months ago, and she was talking about, "Oh, people who have money, oh, I want to be like that." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So let me get this straight. You rather be poor, have no money, and try to find where your food's gonna come from, or have money and know where your next meal is gonna come from. And she was like, "Oh," so I reframed that for her. She kind of thought about it differently a little bit.
A lot of times it is. It's money does give you options or gives you the ability to make certain choices, but money by itself does not create happiness. It doesn't create freedom. It doesn't create, because that's the thing, is if you're tied down and locked into certain behaviors and certain decisions, we're back to that money is the magnifying glass. If
Yes.
your behavior is a certain behavior already and you just add money to it, it doesn't change the behavior unless you reflect on it and decide to change the behavior. It just magnifies it. It just makes it bigger because, again, when I have $1 million, I can make different decisions. And if I'm already making bad decisions, I now just make bad decisions with bigger numbers. It's the same reason why you have the athletes that go out there and they'll get, I'm going to use an athlete just because that's the story
Yeah.
we always hear. They get the $14 million signing bonus. They play for 5 years, making $4 million a year. So now they've got $14 million plus $20 million, and then they get injured and they quit. And a year and a half later, they're bankrupt. And it's like, how in the world did you? That's like $50 million. That's this
What do you
insane
do
amount of
with your
money.
money?
What did you do? How did you go bankrupt in that short of amount of time? And it's because they weren't taught and they didn't learn and they weren't examining the behavior. And so if they had bad behavior to start with, they now just have bad behavior with more zeros. By the way, there's also athletes that do that same thing and become very, they take care of themselves, their family, they give to charity, they do all sorts of philanthropic things. They're some of the most kind, nicest. I've had the
Yeah.
pleasure of meeting some of them, giving people on the planet. Because again, if that behavior was there to start with, or if it's not there to start with, but you do the hard work of going, maybe I should do something different. Maybe I should act different. Maybe I should believe different. Maybe I should change my habits one way or the other. If you don't do that, well, then you just continue to do the same thing. You just have more zeros behind it.
I feel that really hard. I feel like you're yelling at me right now.
I'm
How
not
dare
yelling at
you?
you,
How dare you? Sir, this interview's over.
but Well, and that's the thing though. It's so easy to do it because again, it's not easy to change
It's
habits.
not.
I mean, think about it. All of us do it. And by the way, we all have habits. It's like it's a matter of whether you've examined those habits and spent the energy and the time evaluating them and then the work to change them. That's what's important.
Mm,
But that's hard. I mean, if
it
because this is the
is
thing, if it was easy,
very hard.
everyone would be rich, nobody would be in debt, we'd all be multimillionaires. If it was easy, none of this would be a problem.
I feel that because like I had a hard cocaine habit. I overdosed and died drinking and doing cocaine, and that was my lifestyle
Mhm.
before. But it took me to die and to kind of put things in place, change my habit. But that was an
Mhm.
intense habit I had, and I changed that habit in my life. I was able to change other habits and be able to realize and look at my money habits, my
Mhm.
relationship habits. I was like, okay, these are not healthy. I'm not healthy right now. I had to reflect, like you said, like, I need to change this. I need to figure out what I need to do. And I know that looks different for everyone.
Mhm.
Some people get stuck in that hamster wheel of, okay, I need to change, but I don't know how to change. I don't know what to change. So I do nothing. And that sucks. It's a bad place to be just as well. Then you
And it's
repeat those
inertia.
money habits. Yeah, it's unnerving. It's like, you are nuts. You are crazy. Because I was there. I was that crazy person. I feel that.
Well,
I
and
know a
that's
lot
the
of people
thing
are
though.
there.
It's whether it's an addiction, like, a drug addiction,
Yeah.
cocaine, these sorts of things, whether it's a behavior that you've just never really thought about, whether it's whatever it is, we all have those things. And here's the other thing, by the way, if you do a
Yeah.
lot of hard work and you begin to change them and you start changing the way you think and the way you feel, first off, like you said, it affects other areas of your life. I've had folks that are working on like their money habit, and then they come back after like 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and they're like, I'm losing weight. Why am I losing weight? And it's like all that
Yeah.
happened is you started getting disciplined with your money. So you started paying more attention to your life. And all of a sudden you started making different decisions about food, and it wasn't because you sat down and deliberately did it. It's just discipline in one part of your life tends to create discipline in other areas of your life. So there's that a factor. That's what you just said yourself when you started to
Yes.
clean up the cocaine and the addiction, all of a sudden
Yes.
other areas. The other thing is for a lot of us, it does actually take something massive for us to change.
Wake up.
It's almost shameful in a way, but it's really not. It's actually just human that a lot of us, until
Yes.
we have that life changing moment, that thing where you look down, it's the guy that has the heart attack and then suddenly changes the way he eats and the way he exercises. It's you having a habit so bad that you actually die from it, and then get brought back to life. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, I could do this again. May not happen. Okay.
Those coming to God
But
moments.
realize not everybody makes the change then. And
Yes.
honestly, the better time to change is before you've hit rock bottom. But for
Yeah,
so
before
many
you
of us,
got.
it takes time we got to hit the bottom. Again, I was suicidal because of finances. That's another example of
Yeah.
I finally hit the point where it's like either I'm going to change or I'm going to die.
I
And I decided to change. That's not, I my now as a coach, my goal is to catch people before they're at that point and help them make those shifts and those changes early so that they don't ever reach that true rock bottom. Now, a lot of times they do have something that's caused them to wake up, but it doesn't have to be a negative thing either. One of the most obvious
true.
ones is having a kid. The number of us that it's like we're bebopping along, living our life, doing everything, having fun, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, we just had a child. And you kind of look at your spouse and look at each other and go, we have to grow up. We suddenly have this little human that we're responsible for, we got to make different decisions, it doesn't even have to be a bad thing for it to be those
True.
moments that make us go, whoa, wait a minute. I got to change. It could be graduating college. It could be getting your first job. It could be getting married. It could be getting divorced. All of these things are things that can cause us to step back and re-examine and go, maybe I need to do something different.
Right? That human condition, that human element that you touched on. That's just how it stood out to me. That's really powerful.
Hmm.
It's almost like we don't give. I was talking to a friend about this recently. We don't give ourselves sometimes the space to actually realize that we are human beings. We're
Absolutely.
going to make mistakes. We have these habits, good and bad, and that we do need to kind of get the space, assess what's going on, and take our time. Don't over stress about it. But we, as humans, we over stress. Let's not get that wrong. We're out here freaking out a lot of the time. until we learn to bring that down to a level that's consistent that we can actually work with.
And that freak out doesn't help you. You know,
No, it doesn't. It
it's
feels good for 30 seconds.
it's easy to do. I mean, it's natural. Again, it's nothing, you know, if you do that, don't sit there and go, well, that just means I'm stupid, or, you know, no, that's not what that means. It means you're a person, you know, it means you're human.
Yeah.
We all have those sorts of things and those habits and those biases and the way our brain works. It's not that's kind of one of the things, like, about limiting beliefs and those sorts of things. I don't talk to people about, you never really get rid of things. You instead, you kind of have to learn to how to be in relationship with them in a healthy way. So I talk about it like learning to dance. You know, it's not, I don't get rid of things like the fear of public speaking. I've talked in front of literally crowds 5, 10, 15, even talked in front of a crowd of 50,000 people one time. You know, I've done these things, and people are like, well, you know, you don't have any fear of public speaking. I'm like, are you kidding? Of course I do. Everyone does, you know, because
I
it's a
get coming on
natural
here all
fear.
the time.
But what happens is you learn to dance with it. You learn instead to go, this fear, you know, it's also could be excitement. It gives me energy. It's what makes me get out there and try to do a really good job and make sure I spoke well, because I've got all of these people that are here to hear something. Those opportunities are the chance that you get, and you can either look at that as from the place of fear and learn that and focus on that, or you can learn to kind of dance with it and be in relationship with it in a different way. And then all of a sudden it drives you and it gives you energy. So it's either going to take from you or
Ooh,
it's
I
going to
like
give to
that.
you. But you have to make the decision of how are you going to relate to that stuff. And that could be limiting beliefs, that could be habits, that could be fear. All of those different things show up in that way. And we have to learn how to lean into it, be inspired by it, driven by it, as opposed to dragged backwards by it.
That was so well and beautifully said. That was so powerful. Damn, just like thinking about that kind of in my own life, that I've come to times I've been overwhelmed to try and
Mhm.
change and do so much. But like I said earlier, like you said, give space, step back, just kind of conquer one thing at a time.
Just
You know, just
work
gotta
with
do
one thing
one.
at a time, learn to live, you know, and work with the things that are important, because that's the other thing. I think a lot of times we confuse busy with productive. And now we're kind of more
Yes.
on time, but this is also money. We confuse this idea of getting a lot of stuff done is valuable. That's what busy is. Okay. I can
Yeah.
prove to you that busy is actually not necessarily a good thing. If I paid you right now, if I said, hey, just, I'm going to pay you $100 to go in my backyard and pick up rocks. I've got a pile of rocks in my backyard. I'm going to have you pick up a rock from the rock pile on the left-hand side of my yard, walk over to the right-hand side, drop it on the ground, go back, pick up a rock, drop it, go back and forth, and just move this pile of rocks from this side of the yard to that side of the yard.
Like by
By
hand?
Yep, just by hand, one rock at a time.
Hell no.
And then when you get all of them moved, you're going to pick the rocks up from the other side and you're going to carry them back. Okay, well, maybe not $100. How about $1,000? If I pay you $1,000, would you do that?
I'll get a bulldozer and go,
No, it has to be by hand. How about $10,000?
now you're just keeping me busy. I see your point here.
There's a point, okay, where I could offer you enough
I
money
feel
where
you.
you'd go, yeah, I'll go do that. But even there, you'd only do it for so long.
Yes.
Okay, there maybe you do it, you know, $100,000 is like, I'll do it a couple of days, you know, and then I'm going to kind of bank that money and I'm good, you know. But you wouldn't do it forever. That's busy. That's all busy is. As busy as picking up rocks and moving them from one side of the yard to the other. Productive is if you're using those rocks and instead of just moving them from one side of the yard to the other, all of a sudden you're using them to build, you know, an outdoor barbecue pit area, or you're using them to build a beautiful archway, or you're creating something, or you're moving them so you can put in that new garden that your wife wants, or you're moving. If there's a purpose behind it as well as the money, now all of a sudden it starts to become more intentional. It becomes, you're doing the right things, you're doing it for a reason, not just I'm doing stuff. So I hate this busy culture. I hate
I love that.
that you ask people, how are you doing? Nowadays, what's the response? It's either okay, which is really just a polite way of saying, please don't talk to me anymore, you know, or alternatively, it's I'm busy. That's our answer to the question. And both of those are stupid answers.
Oh my God. I love how you put that because I have a friend all the time I talk to. I'm like, yeah, I'm building a business. I'm trying to build something, create something. And he's always like, oh, you're staying busy. That's good. I'm like,
Yeah, it's not
What?
busy.
No,
That's not the
I'm
point.
not busy.
Yeah.
But he's like, yeah, I'm busy too. I'm like, I'm not busy. I'm creating, I'm building. The difference. This is the
That's
difference
a
here.
productive mindset. And by the way, you still may be doing just as many things. It's just you're
Yes.
doing them with a purpose behind them.
I
Now
love
all
how
of a
you said
sudden
that.
it's about productivity, it's about focus, it's about inspiration, it's about intentionality. It's all of these words that everyone
Yes.
those are all good words. Nobody's going to hear any of those words and go, oh, that's a terrible, you shouldn't be intentional. No, everyone goes, oh yeah, intentional, of course I'm intentional. Are you really? I wouldn't put it quite that way, but
I am.
you know I actually think most stupidity comes from when you're not being intentional. It really comes
Yeah, I
not
can
from
feel
being,
that.
because most people, used to be in leadership, and occasionally the leaders would come to me and they're complaining about an employee, and I'm like, do you really believe that that employee shows up to work on Monday morning going, boy, I really hope I suck at my job this week? Can you really honestly believe that they think that? And because if the answer is yes, that's one problem. Okay. If the answer is yes, they are literally showing up wanting to be bad at their job. Okay. That's one
I've heard
problem.
that before.
And
I have
again,
heard
I'm
that.
not saying it's
It does
impossible.
happen.
I'm not saying the answer
Yeah.
is no all the time, but a lot of times it is no. A lot of times it's like, well, no, they actually are trying. They're trying to do a good job, but they're failing. Okay, that's a different problem,
Yeah. How are you helping them? What are you
because
doing?
now it's what have we done? What systems have we put in place? What are tools? What training? What support? What
That's
whatever?
a lot of work for a leader. What do you mean?
But then we can solve the problem. Okay,
Very true.
because and the truth is, if you because either way, if it's the person that's deliberately showing up and can't do the job, okay, as a leader you now have to make the hard decision of, how do I let this person go or transfer them to somewhere else where their skills are better or whatever, right? I actually have to do that, and by the way, that's hard work too.
It
And then
is.
the
I
other
feel like a lot of, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I feel like a lot of leaders don't understand that sometimes. They don't want to have those conversations with people. They're like, oh, we just have to let them go. It's okay.
Yeah, it's
But
no,
everyone
that's
has
hard
the
work if
gift,
you're really going to
place,
do it
and
well,
purpose.
if you're going to do it right. And then the other
Yeah.
is, if you want to train them and support them and develop them,
Yes.
because now all of a sudden you can start thinking, okay, they are actually trying to do a good job. Now, what's the block? What's holding them back? Is it a
Yes.
lack of skill? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it I'm putting too much on their plate? Is it I'm not putting enough on their plate? All of those are possibilities.
That was my issue with a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Not enough on my plate. Not enough
And
responsibility.
honestly, not enough on
Yeah.
an employee's plate can actually burn an employee out just
Yes.
as quickly as overwork.
Oh, 100%. I feel that too hard right now. I've actually been through that with many companies I've worked for in the past.
Mhm.
I actually bring it up to the leadership and tell them, hey, there's not a lot. Yeah, I need more responsibility.
I need
Like,
more.
oh, we don't think you're ready, or we'll have to see how you do with this, my mundane, stupid task. Here you go. But it's like they're not understanding what I'm trying to say here. They're just kind of they're compounding it to be worse.
Right.
And
And
I had to make the decision
and
to
there's all
leave.
sorts of things that that happens in leadership and in companies where it again, the flip of it, right? If I just did the one of the
Yeah,
employees saying that they don't want to show up and be bad, the flip is, as employees oftentimes will ascribe to our bosses maliciousness or stupidity or these sorts of, we make it like, oh, well, they just don't make good decisions. And it's like, okay, again, usually that's not the whole story either. There's
I
other
found
stuff going
myself there
on.
before as
you
well. Yeah,
and especially once you get into a leadership position, all of a sudden you start going, oh my goodness, when I make one decision, it isn't an isolated thing, it affects 72 other things. And so now all of a sudden, every decision ripples out in this spider web. I got to think differently. I've got to act differently. I've got to communicate differently. I've got to do all of those things differently now, because my way things are affected with me, it affects the whole picture. It ripples out. Again, I had 20 leaders, a team of 180 people. If I fired one of those leaders or promoted one of those leaders, it didn't just affect that leader. It affected all of the people reporting to them. It affected other departments that went through them. It rippled out and could affect a much wider pattern. So the decision making is different. And again, does that mean every leader out there is good and there aren't malicious leaders and there aren't leaders out there making stupid decisions just because they're a jerk? Oh, absolutely not. I've worked for some of them too. There are leaders that you're like, oh, okay, you're just an idiot. I got it. Okay.
If you've been a victim of poor leadership, please reach out to us
That's
now.
most. I mean, most of if you're over the age of about 18, you've probably at some point in your life
Yeah,
worked for a poor leader. It's inevitable. And
that
again,
is,
why? We're back to the same conversation we had earlier. That you
yes.
don't teach people how to be good leaders. We don't give them the skills. What usually happens is they find somebody like Justin, you're in IT, you're in, that sort of stuff. Hey, you're really good at the technical side of it. So now we're going to make you a manager and put you in charge of people. But
Yeah.
we're not actually going to teach you any leadership skills. We're not actually going to tell you how to be a good manager or how to be a good leader. We're just going to promote you because you're good at the job.
And I see
That
that so
doesn't
many times.
necessarily mean they're going to be a good leader or a good manager.
You see that time and time
It always
again.
happens. It happens a ton, and it's always a mistake unless that person does the work or has a really good mentor, whatever, has had a great example themselves, something that has given them the skill set. But it's funny how often they promote people to leadership, not looking at their leadership skill set, but looking at their technical skill set. They're a good
Yeah.
sales guy, so we're going to make them the sales manager. Being a good sales guy and being a good sales manager are two different sets of skills. The best manager might not actually be your best sales guy. It might be, but it might not
100%.
be. And that's the weird thing but we don't look at it that way. We think, oh, if they're good at the technical side of it, if they're good at the skills side of it, they'll automatically be a good leader, as if somehow leadership is just this sort of thing that you just
I
learn.
understand now.
If I
I
give you
am
the
leader.
title, you suddenly are a great leader. I gave you the
Yeah,
title in the corner office, boom, you're good. It's like, no, no, no,
I am
no.
leadership.
There's skills that they've got to learn, ways of thinking they've got to learn, and we don't teach them. So we're setting them up for failure.
It always blows my mind about that because where did we come across this understanding to promote technical people and not understand we have to teach skills? Like, where did we go wrong as human beings or in our work as a society? Where do you?
Well, I think it's the same thing that we were talking about earlier when we were talking about money. We look at them as, with money, a math problem. With leadership and things like that, we look at them as a technical problem. We look at them as a mechanical kind of thing, as opposed to recognizing that there's a whole nother set of skills. We usually call them the soft skills. Don't like that term too
Yeah,
much
they're hard
myself
to tell.
because they're really hard, but it's the softer, it's the emotional side, it's the understanding people side, it's the learning how to communicate side. It's being able to focus on people not just as widgets but as people, as
Yeah,
actually looking at someone and going, hey, to help Justin be successful, I need to do these things for him, but to help Scott be successful, I need to do these things for Scott. And those may not be exactly the same things, but that's okay. It's confusing things like, for things to be fair, everything has to be exactly the same. It's like, no, for things to be fair, they probably shouldn't be exactly the same, because we're different
yeah.
people. We have different behaviors. We have different skills. We have different needs. But it's easier to just treat people as if they're just
It's the
widgets,
same.
if they're
And
all
I've
the
been
same.
learning that myself.
It's
I,
easy.
I've,
It's
I
just not right.
I go through that like a few companies I've worked with before, where they treat you like a piece of office equipment. But I'm a human being. I work in IT. We need to communicate differently with each other, but they just don't understand that. They just treat you as like a walking doormat. It's unfortunate that we're still there. Maybe of a society that people haven't really learned or taken the time to learn and understand these things.
Absolutely. It's
It
it's
blows my mind.
and again, we talk about them as if, I've had leaders and things that are talk about those sorts of skills and be like, oh, that's such a waste of time to go learn about that stuff. And it's like,
It's
no, it's
not.
really not. Because if you do it well, all of a sudden people are more engaged, they're more productive, they're
Yes.
actually it actually helps the bottom line of the company. It's all of the stuff that the company actually says they want, more profit, more productivity, more engagement, more output, more, right? We want all of that stuff. And then they try to get it by mistreating people, and then they're upset that they don't get it. It's like, well, but if you'd actually treat your people well, you're more likely to get those things that you actually say you're after, the things that you really want. But yeah, it does take time and energy, investment and intentionality and all of those things. All of these sorts of Russian nesting dolls of ideas, I think they apply at a lot of different levels. They apply at an individual level. They apply at a business level. They apply, with couples. They apply with money. They apply with leadership. They apply with time. They apply because, again, at the end of the day, we're all people. We have, yes, we're all unique, but we're also all the same. Both of those are actually true. There are things
Yeah.
about us that are completely different, but there are also some core things that we just have some of the same wiring and some of the same sorts of thinkings and behaviors and different instincts and all of these things. So it's recognizing our uniqueness, but also recognizing the things that are just human and valuing those things, putting into those things is much more likely to lead to success at whatever level we're talking about. You as an individual, you as the leader of your company, you as an employee, you as a father, you as a husband, you as a son, you as a dad, mom,
Preach.
whatever, any of those roles, you've got to do that and be in an environment that does that to really be successful.
That is so well said. But I preach all the time to people. It is all connected, and it levels up your life as a human being and all the things that you're doing in your life as a human being.
And then that
Like you
levels up
said,
the people around you, which then levels up more
yeah,
people. We can either spread out for good or we can spread out for evil, but either way, we're spreading something.
right.
What are we spreading? Are you going out and smiling at somebody and opening the door for them, or are you going around like a grouch all day long? Guess what? That affects people.
Now, I heard something recently from Cody Sanchez talks about the way you do one thing is the way
You
you
do
do all
everything.
things.
Yep.
And I didn't understand that for the longest time because some things just came naturally, other things didn't.
Right.
But just really unpacking that, it makes sense because kind of like if it's behind closed doors, if it's out in the open, you're gonna be doing those
Yep.
same things in that way.
It comes back to those habits. If
Yeah,
you've developed a habit of doing things a certain way, then guess what? You're going to revert to doing things that way. Period. And again, a habit in one area, if you're wasteful of your time, you're probably also wasteful in your money. You're probably also wasteful in the relationships you have. You're probably also wasteful if all of these things spill out. If you're intentional in your time, you're probably also intentional in your money. It's again why I'm working with them on finances and they're like, why am I losing weight? Why am I getting more done? Why am I doing this? It's because you start getting discipline and intentionality in one area of your life, it naturally begins to affect others. It's
a snowball
why
effect.
habits are so freaking important, And yet, guess what? They're also one of the hardest things to actually change. They're also one of the hardest things that we deal with. And they're also one of the most invisible things. We tend to not pay
They are.
attention to them.
They are. I mean, because like yeah, you said we can't see them, so like we don't feel that they exist. They're real. We can't quantify them. We're like, what is this?
It
This doesn't
almost
really
takes someone
exist.
from outside. And again, this is the value of a coach or a friend or a spouse. Or, I jokingly say that sometimes you need that person to put your arm around you. And sometimes they're putting their arm around you to really, pat you on the back and kind of console you. Sometimes they're putting their arm around you because they're cheering you on and kind of helping you run forward. Sometimes they're putting their arm around you because they're smacking you upside the head. But whatever it is, we always need that person who's able to come along beside us and kind of go, I'm going to put my arm around you, sometimes for one of those, sometimes for a different
What are
one.
you doing?
It's like either way, but we all need
That
that.
comes to
It
accountability,
is. It's
which I'm learning
accountability.
about.
It's accountability. It's consistency. It's all of these little words, and people hate. They get to the point where they almost hate hearing it. They almost
I'll say
hate
those words
hearing it
again.
because it's like, oh, it just becomes noise. But it's like that actually is your life, believe it or not.
But you have to listen for it not to be noise.
Mhm.
If you're actually truly tuning in to understand, to listen, ask questions, clarifying, then it becomes less noise and more, like you said, intentions and all that builds that discipline in your life. So yeah.
And you have to want it. You have to be the one to
Yeah.
decide, hey, I'm going to do something different. If you're thinking that you're going to hire a coach or bring in some and they're going to change you,
I'm
ain't
saved.
going to happen. Okay. The only person that can change you is you. You can't change anyone else and no one
No,
else can
you
change
can't.
you. You've got to make the decision and then put in the work and put in the reps. It's if you want to lose weight, you got to do the work that it takes to lose weight. There isn't a magic button. There isn't an easy button, that Staples easy button. You see those on the commercial. I guess I'm dating myself because I don't know if that
I used to
commercial's
have
on
one of
anymore.
those. It just magically disappeared because things got easier without it.
The problem is that easy button doesn't work. There isn't one.
It's a distraction. It's a distraction. I know it's there. I'm like, oh, I can just use this anytime. Not true. I actually heard that before from someone. I didn't understand this at first for a couple of months ago until I really understood it more clearly. And then you just said is that when you get a coach, you work with them and you expect things to change, expect things to fall in place and to kind of change your life. And it's like that easy button. But I understand that I had to do
You
work
still got to do the
too.
reps. Yeah.
So yeah, me working with that coach, it goes both ways. I didn't really quite understand that. I get it more now
Well, and
because I'm doing the work, I'm changing.
to give
They're
a
doing
good
the work, they're
I'm
changing.
doing work too. Yeah, it's not that the coach isn't doing anything. It's kind of like Yoda
Yeah.
and Luke Skywalker. Yoda is the guide. That's the coach. But Yoda was doing things, and then Luke Skywalker, that's the client. That's the person. I mean, he was the one running and dumping and flipping. I'm thinking about Luke and Yoda on Dagobah. If
Yes, I
Star Wars
remember that.
reference, folks.
Yes.
If he's the one actually running and learning the Force and all of that, but was Yoda still actually doing things to help teach him and expose him and open his mind and help him look at things differently? Absolutely. So it's not that
Yeah.
Yoda wasn't important, and it's not that Luke wasn't important. It's that Luke's doing the work, doing the reps. Yoda's there to be the guide to help open up the doors to, sometimes it's just asking the right question or putting the right frame or saying, have you ever looked at it this way? Or, hey, rather than thinking about I can do X or Y, let's come up with 17 other things that we could do. But there's only X and Y. Really? Let's come up with a few more. And somebody comes up with 12, options. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, it isn't just two things. I can do lots of things. Now, some of those are good things and some of those aren't things that you want to do, but it doesn't matter. There's always more than two choices. It's all of these things to help you begin to think and look a different
Creativity is
way.
real.
That's the value of the coach. You're the one that's actually doing the reps. It would be like expecting to go to a gym, let the physical therapist work out, and you lose weight.
Hell yeah. Why can't that happen?
Doesn't happen.
Why isn't it like that? It seems like that's how a lot of us think about things,
It
how
is.
it should be.
We want the physical therapist to do the lifting, and I'm going to lose the weight and build the muscles. And it's like, yeah, no, it doesn't work that way.
I have a fitness coach right now helping me to bulk up. Why can't he just bulk up, do the work, and I'll bulk up just from being next to him?
You'll just somehow it'll rub off on you, but it doesn't.
Yeah, some magical stuff. Come on. But I know it takes a conscious decision to really understand where you want to be, where you're trying to go, and where you want to achieve. It takes work. Yeah. And I that's one of the things I've been trying to do with this podcast is have these conversations to help people understand that work that you have to put in. It's not pretty. It's ugly as hell many of the times.
A lot of times it is. It's messy. It's not a straight line. I talk about the two phrases that I use. One is it's progress, not perfect. It's about making progress. It's not about getting things perfect because honestly, progress is more important. And the other is it's a process, not an event. We don't change things usually with a light switch. Even when you have that light switch moment, you were talking about, dying and being brought back. That's a light switch moment, but that's not when the change actually happened. That's just when the decision happened. The change took years after that, probably still going on today in some way.
It is.
Because that's the process. The event isn't what really changed you. The event was just the point of decision. The work after that is the change.
Ooh, very well said, 100%. And it's still ongoing. It gets frustrating. I get sick and tired sometimes. I want to lay on the couch and cry and eat a bucket of ice cream. But I have to remember, like you said earlier, my why. That why is very important. Why do I want to be financially free? Why do I want to build a business? Why do I want to be in a better place in my life? Why do I not want to be who I was? That why
Mhm.
is just so important. A little bit of silence for the why. Scott, I want to thank you so much for coming on here today. This has been amazing and very insightful, way more than I bargained for. And I definitely want to have you back on here again. I
Anytime.
feel there's way more that we can give our audience here.
Absolutely.
Way
Happy to
more.
come back.
Before we wrap up today, is there any last things you would like to leave our audience, how they could start their journey and how they can reach out to you as well?
Absolutely. I actually put together a page just for your listeners. So it has information about how they could get in touch with me. It's got some free resources on there around time, talent, and treasures. It's got information about my book. So the Inspired Living book that's back here is my book that actually goes through some of these things we were talking about today with some exercises, some things you could do on your own. Maybe you're not ready to jump right into coaching, but you want to kind of start thinking about this and working on it. That's a great first step. So you can find all of that if you go to my website at inspiredstewardship.com and then just /cyberpulse. So that's inspiredstewardship.com /cyberpulse. You can find all of that over there. Information about me, my podcast, all of that junk. It's easier to just put it all on one place so folks can find it really easy.
Hell yeah, brother. I'll definitely put that down in the show notes so they can find it a lot easier.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now, one question we're going to leave you with that we leave all of our audience members with that we did not tell you about ahead of time. What does it mean to you to be a human being?
I think it comes back to that emotional stuff that we've been talking about, the why and all of those. I think what it is to be human is to find our purpose, to find that thing that we're supposed to be being. And I'm going to use that instead of doing, because I don't think it's just the work we do. I think it's who we are. How do we show up? And when you find that, when you find the way that you were designed, the way that you were built, the way that you were wired, it's showing up that way every day in every way. And when you do that, then I think that's really being human.
Damn, that was so beautifully said. Damn, that really resonates even with me. Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate I'm just like taking that in right now. I love asking that question. I just love everyone gives such a different answer. And they're usually just so inspirational and just deep and deeply heartfelt, you know?
Well, I think
It's great being a human being.
again, it's back to I said earlier, the bad thing is you're the problem. The good thing is you're the solution. I think that's a lot of what humanity
That's
is.
like sounds like a double-edged sword,
It is
buddy.
realizing that, hey, you know what? It's to some extent it is on you. You
It
be
is.
intentional. You've got to be able to do that, or else
I
you're just gonna wander through life.
right? One thing I always say that really helps me is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
That works. Yep. I agree
And
with
that
that one.
always kind of gets me and brings me back like, hold on a minute. My work is never done here. I have to start somewhere. Let's
Absolutely.
start now. So yes. Thank you again so much, Scott,
Thank
for
you.
coming on here. I appreciate your time. And we gotta have you back.
Anytime.
Hell yeah. You have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, Scott.
Bye.